Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's critical discussion. I'm Congresswoman Lori Trahan, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by two incredible panelists, Pam Wilmot from Common Cause and Quentin Palfrey from the Voter Protection Corps, for a conversation where we're going to focus on the myths and the disinformation that has been spreading online, and frankly, from the president directly regarding this year's election. As you know by now, we're just 5 days away from the most consequential election of our lifetime, and voting has been underway here in Massachusetts for weeks, with early voting set to conclude tomorrow. Across our country, more than 78 million people have already cast their votes, including nearly 2 million people here in the Commonwealth. Just to put those numbers in perspective, that means we've already surpassed more than half of the total number of votes cast in the 2016 election, both in Massachusetts and around the country. Those numbers indicate that we are likely seeing historic voter turnout in this election, something everyone should be able to agree is good for our democracy. But here's why today's conversation is so important. We've seen everything from erroneous claims that voting by mail will increase voter fraud, to the arrests of individuals running robocalls designed to suppress voter turnout or sway voters from supporting a particular candidate. Nearly 2/3 of all votes that have been reported so far were cast using mail-in or absentee ballots. And people with nefarious intentions are purposely attempting to spread disinformation that threatens to undermine the integrity of our election and even intimidate people into not voting. You know, just last week, FBI and intelligence community officials informed us that Iran was behind threatening emails sent to Democratic voters in some states designed to intimidate them into not voting or to vote against Joe Biden. They also said that both Iran and Russia had gotten a hold of voter registration information in some states. While this doesn't necessarily mean that they had to hack into any system, since some of this information is already publicly available, it does mean that they could have the ability to target disinformation campaigns based on voters' registration status. So my plea to all of you tuning in is that you take what you see on social media, whether that's here on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, with a grain of salt. If it looks suspect, there's probably a reason for it. And if you know it's wrong, don't hesitate to report it. Most importantly, if you feel like your right to vote has been impacted or your rights under the Massachusetts Voter Bill of Rights have been violated in any way, call the Secretary of the Commonwealth's Elections Division at 1-800-462-VOTE. Now, with all that being said, I'd like to introduce our expert panelists because they're going to answer some really important questions today. Our first guest is Quentin Palfrey, the chair of Voter Protection Corps, and Quentin has played a leadership role in voter protection programs in battleground states in countless presidential, senatorial, and gubernatorial campaigns over the last 16 years. He was the 2004 New Hampshire Voter Protection Director for the Kerry Edwards campaign, the 2008 Ohio Voter Protection Director for the Obama-Biden campaign, and has been a senior advisor to numerous voter protection programs at the national level and here in Massachusetts, as well as Virginia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. During the Obama administration, Quentin served as a senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness in the White House Office of Science and Technology, and Deputy General Counsel for Strategic Initiatives at the United States Department of Commerce. Quentin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Congresswoman Trahan, and thank you so much for your leadership on this issue. It is a really exciting time with the election just 5 days away. And as you say, we're seeing this voter enthusiasm all over the country. It's just really important that we make sure this election's free and fair and that we make sure that voters have access to accurate information about their rights. So I'm really excited about our conversation.
That's right. We are too. Our next guest is Pam Wilmot, the Vice President of State Operations at Common Cause. In her role, Pam oversees a nationwide network of 30 state offices and advisory boards, each of which advocates for a different slate of locally needed democracy reforms. She previously served as the executive director of Common Cause Massachusetts, where she built broad coalitions, advised legislators and state officials, and employed grassroots organizing techniques to win dozens of groundbreaking changes. She's widely recognized for her expertise on the Electoral College, campaign finance, ethics, elections, and government transparency laws. She also serves as the director of the National Popular Vote Initiative at Common Cause. Pam, welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me, Congresswoman. Let me just add one other thing, since we're talking about voter protection today. Common Cause is a member of the Election Protection Coalition, which is the largest nonpartisan voter protection program in the country that features the 1-866 Our Vote hotline. And I've been doing that personally since 2004, including in Ohio and some other states, in addition to here in Massachusetts. So on a lot of voter protection work together.
I don't think we could have two better experts on today's call to help guide this discussion. So thank you for your time. Oh, let's get right into it. You know, President Trump has continually called for people to show up on election day, to join the army for Trump and watch people vote. Now, there are actual poll watchers in voting locations on election day, but they aren't just random people who show up demanding to watch people vote. Quentin, can you explain what a poll watcher is, how they're chosen, and what the difference is between being a poll watcher and engaging in voter intimidation?
Sure, thanks so much for the question. So all across the country, there are different rules for who's allowed to be a poll monitor, or in some cases, they're called technically a challenger, but often there's a rule for somebody to be designated as somebody who can be at the polling location in an official capacity, either in connection with a campaign or in connection with nonpartisan efforts like the Election Protection Coalition, to help voters assist in their voting, to identify problems and help resolve those. And this is a really important service that folks can do. I do recommend that folks get engaged with the Election Protection Coalition that Pam just mentioned. It's a really great way to help with your democracy. Another great thing to do is to be a poll worker yourself. There are poll worker shortages in a number of parts of the country, particularly because of the pandemic. And so those are great ways to serve and make the election smooth. Voter intimidation is a totally different thing. It's illegal under federal law. It's illegal under a number of different statutes. And I do agree that President Trump's rhetoric and Don Jr.'s rhetoric around this issue has been deeply unhelpful. And there will be poll observers who can work with election officials all across the country if there is any voter intimidation to resolve it quickly and quietly. But what voters need to know is that generally voting is easy and smooth, whether you choose to vote in person early or on election day, or if you choose to vote by mail. This is a system that's going to go really smoothly, and you should be confident that this is going to work very well over the next 5 days.
Thank you. It's so great to have that all cleared up. You know, the intelligence community unanimously agrees that Russia meddled in the 2016 election, and they've already briefed congressional leaders and even the public about attempts by foreign adversaries to do so again this year. When intelligence officials talk about meddling, they're often careful to clarify that they aren't necessarily talking about the manipulation of votes being tallied, but rather attempts to sow doubt in the results of the election. So Pam, can you talk a little bit about how what you have been doing at Common Cause to ensure the integrity of our elections and what people really need to take seriously over the coming days and weeks with regard to posts on social media or even from the president about unfounded conspiracy theories?
Yeah, I mean, social media is rife with disinformation and misinformation. As you've mentioned, a chunk of it from foreign actors that are intentionally misleading, some of them for partisan gain, and some of it just innocent. People forwarding things that they haven't checked out themselves or saying something inaccurate. And so it's always best first, before you share anything, please think twice. Look at it, evaluate it. And then second, Common Cause is doing a program to monitor misinformation and disinformation. We have about 2,000, 3,000 voters that are online volunteers every day, combing through Facebook, Twitter, even Instagram, some of these other things, to look to see if there are posts that are inaccurate. Of course, the media themselves have added a layer of evaluation and things, but they don't actually do the job quite as well as I think they say they do. So we flagged over 5,000 pieces of content and had most of them or many of them removed. People can also go to reportdisinfo.org themselves to report something they think is disinformation and sort of just do that independently. But we, it's very, it's pretty scary. I mean, part of the goal is actually to sow partisan division, to create doubt, to increase our divisions. So it isn't just, it's the red meat, and it's a red meat on both sides in some ways. And I think people just have to step back, take a deep breath. The system has worked. I think it will work. It doesn't mean we're going to have some bumps along the road, but we have at Common Cause 40,000 volunteers nationwide that will be at the polls helping to answer questions on election day, as well as these hotlines. The parties have theirs. And I think that it's going to be a record turnout, and people should feel confident that their vote will be counted.
I could not agree more. Quentin, when I've talked to people about casting their vote by mail this year, I'm often met with questions about the president's claims that, you know, increased mail-in voting means that there will be widespread voter fraud this year. Now, I'm usually quick to point out that it's not the case and that there's no real basis for that claim. And I'm grateful that, you know, Governor Baker and Secretary Galvin have been quick to do the same. But I think it's important that people know the process behind mail-in voting so that they hear what actually goes into counting these ballots once they're received. So can you take a moment to explain the importance of offering expanded mail-in and absentee voting, especially this year, and what exactly the process is when a mail-in ballot is received by their local election office to ensure that it's counted?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I think you're absolutely right. So we've had a very good track record with vote by mail across the country. A number of states have implemented it for several years. And their experience with mail-in voting, even at scale, has been extremely positive. It increases voter turnout, including voter turnout for both parties. So in Utah, a lot of people vote by mail and they vote for Republicans. So it's not a partisan thing. Every independent analysis of vote by mail has suggested that it's effective and remarkably free of fraud. And that's the Brennan Center, that's the Nonpartisan Policy Center. So these are independent assessments that show that what Donald Trump and Attorney General Barr have been saying about vote by mail is frankly just lies. And it is intended to destabilize and discourage voters from voting that way. But, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it is really important that we make sure that folks are able to vote in a way that they feel safe about, and that, you know, as the numbers are spiking up a little bit, I think a number of folks would prefer to vote by mail options. And this is an ordinary process. You apply for a ballot, you get the ballot, you fill it in, and it's counted like ordinary ballots. And I think that the way that we've thought about this is that it's important for voters to have a number of different options. So vote by mail has been a great strategy. As you talked about at the beginning, a large number of voters have already voted, and that's good for democracy. But as we head into the next 5 days, I think a lot of folks are going to vote in person, and that's important too. We're going to have we're going to have polling places open across the state and across the country. We need to make sure there are enough poll workers, enough PPE, and that moves well. But those are good options for voters as well.
Absolutely. And, we're seeing that now. I mean, the whole point of this is to make voting more accessible, get more people to exercise this, important right. And so it's great that in this election that folks are afforded more options than ever before. A lot of people have heard of the unsubstantiated claims that the Postal Service is intentionally leaving mail-in ballots in trash cans or down by the river. These claims have been repeatedly debunked by media outlets and secretaries of state in both red and blue states. But I think a lot of people are concerned about what this kind of rhetoric regarding the Postal Service combined with the Postmaster General's cuts to service are going to mean for the delivery of mail-in ballots. So Pam, I find myself thanking my mail carrier more and more these days for all the work he's doing. But can you take a moment to explain just how essential it is that people know they can rely on the Postal Service if they've mailed in their ballot already, and even more importantly, how they can track their ballots?
Yes. The mail is very reliable and safe. It has been slowed down, however. I think that is a reality that even though there were cuts from the Postmaster General, that those have been, those allegedly have been rolled back, but at least myself, I still notice that mail is taking a little longer than it has in the past. So people should be aware of that. But in terms of the security of that, that is very clear. Your ballot is secure. It is also secure if you've used a drop box. This is new for Massachusetts, but there are drop boxes now in most communities. There was, maybe people might have heard, an incident where a homeless person put an incendiary device in a box that was clearly not intentional. It only affected a handful of ballots, which is, a handful too many. But it really is still a very effective way of casting your ballot. We haven't seen that anywhere else. And also many of these boxes are fireproof. So to find out whether your ballot has been received, you can go to trackmyballotma.com. It's a great site. It will say, when your ballot was mailed out, when it was received or accepted. And frankly, if you mailed it back now, you're probably okay, because Massachusetts extended our deadline all the way through Friday after the election. But as we get closer to the election, and because of the delays, you can actually cast your ballot by mail if it's postmarked on election day. But since it has to have been received 3 days later, we're advising people to use another dropping location, such as the Dropbox. But it is, I think we are going to have record participation, and these are some of the reasons why. And I'm looking forward to trying to make some of these changes permanent here in Massachusetts and across the country.
Well, we're with you. We are your partners in that for sure. And we voted early today. My husband and I, and we brought our 2 young daughters, but dropped off our son's mail-in ballots to the drop-off box, because I don't want to take a chance either. As you said, we have been experiencing some delays, and if you've already put it in the mailbox, you're probably fine. But if you can get to your drop-off box, as we get closer to Tuesday, I would definitely suggest putting that ballot right in that box in front of your city or town hall. It's no secret that social media is often a vehicle for disinformation. In fact, platform algorithms on Facebook and Twitter and all the others, they're designed to keep us interacting with their content longer, by any and all means necessary, sending us down, a rabbit hole and creating an echo chamber from which outside perspectives, including facts, are sometimes unable to penetrate. And this can result in an individual developing extreme views that they feel are entirely rooted in fact. And it has undoubtedly played a role in the polarization of our country. Quentin, what steps do you think social media companies should be taking to combat disinformation? And where does the responsibility fall? And what can we do to avoid it?
Yeah, so as you say, the disinformation environment has been increasingly bad. Foreign adversaries pitting us against each other and trying to confuse voters. Unfortunately, President Trump has been one of the key sources of disinformation online, and his behavior has been reckless and anti-democratic. We have also seen voter suppression efforts targeted at people of color and students and other historically disenfranchised groups online. I want to give a shout out to Common Cause. Pam mentioned some of the great work that they're doing on combating misinformation and disinformation online. And I think that there's really a three-part strategy for making sure that we help voters know their rights. The first is that the best solution is to disseminate good information. We want to make sure that voters know their rights. We want to make sure they know any changes to state laws, any changes to polling places. And the most effective strategy for combating disinformation is actually just to disseminate positive, accurate information. I think social media companies, election officials, and the public all have a role in making sure that people know their rights. The second thing, as Pam pointed out, there are listening networks to identify times when information is not correct, either because of confusion or because of attempts to confuse people. And if you're interested in a way to help with the election over the next 5 days, signing up for Common Cause's listening network would be a great strategy. And then the final thing is rapid response. So groups like the Voter Protection Corps and other voting rights groups all over the country have been trying to identify groups of people who are receiving confusing information and responding to that. So just this week, we had a campaign to make sure that New Hampshire students know their rights. There was some confusing messaging and voter suppressive messaging that we saw coming out of the New Hampshire Republican Party, and wanted to make sure that student voters knew that they were entitled to vote in New Hampshire. So it's important for us to give good information, listen for bad information, and respond with good information that dispels that confusion.
That's terrific, and those are good, easy steps that we can all take. I mean, too often, you know, something will come from a trusted source or a friend or a relative, and it'll be shared or it'll be liked, and you know, folks won't take the time to read it, and they share it, and all of a sudden it spreads like wildfire, and unwittingly folks are sometimes spreading bad or inaccurate information. So that's great. We all have a role to play in all of this. You know, I'm so grateful for both of you taking the time to answer these important questions so that we can set the record straight. You know, before we wrap up, I do want to give each of you a chance to talk about any myths or disinformation attempts we haven't already discussed that you feel are imperative to address before Election Day, and leave voters tuning in with some parting words. So Quentin, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity and for this great conversation. One thing I would say is that disinformation and confusion tends to be targeted at exactly the set of voters who have historically faced other kinds of voter suppression and who have historically been disenfranchised. So communities of color, particularly African Americans and Latinos, are subject to a lot of the worst voter suppression online. And those are communities that we need to be particularly focused on as we're combating voter suppression. Students are another group. And as Congresswoman Trahan just mentioned, we shouldn't be repeating disinformation. Even if we're trying to rebut it, we should be focusing on the positive information. And just sort of a little bit more broadly, as we think about the 5 days that remain in the most important election cycle of our lifetimes, I think that we all have a role to play in making sure that this election is free and fair. And just want to suggest a few ways that we can do that. The first is to vote, make a plan to vote, make sure that people in your family and your community go out to vote. If you have an opportunity to spend some time over the next few days working on a campaign, working as a poll monitor. There are great opportunities through the Election Protection Coalition to work as a poll monitor, volunteer to be a poll worker, or just help with a campaign you believe in. I think that's an important thing. And then I mentioned these listening networks. It's great if you can help with Common Cause to identify these problematic messages and make sure that we're in a position to respond to them. But whatever we do, I think we all want to wake up on Wednesday morning knowing we did everything we could to make sure that this election was free and fair, and that we get our democracy back on track. So thank you for including me in this conversation, and thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you, Quentin. Pam.
So I think Quentin said it very, very well. Make a plan to vote and do it. Don't let misinformation and disinformation dissuade you from voting. That's the whole purpose of it, is to suppress voter participation, to sow confusion, to make people feel like their vote is not safe. Just go out and vote. One thing that I meant to mention during the vote by mail discussion was that if you have received your ballot, even if you've received it and mailed it back and it has not been accepted, you can still vote in person. If it has not been received by your election official, you still have the right to vote in person. And they will set aside then that ballot later. So use every opportunity you can, whether it's coming out to vote early through Friday or casting a ballot by mail or in person. Make sure you participate. And then I also agree that it's incumbent on all of us to participate and do whatever we can to spread that good information. Common Cause has sent out texts to 12 million people in the past 2 weeks with voting rights, with responsibilities, with the 1-866 Our Vote hotline, which is the number to call if you have questions or have a problem, and there are legal volunteers standing by. If you want to join us with voter protection efforts or social media monitoring, protectthevote.net is the way to do that. And also remember that we will not probably have, I know we will not have election results on election night this year. That is one of the big pieces of misinformation, disinformation that will be spread and is spreading, that there's something wrong if we don't know the final results. In fact, many states accept ballots well after the election, some as long as 2 weeks. And during that period, they're still counting the ballots, and that is the right thing to do. We want everyone to vote. So take a deep breath. We will get through this. We may not know the results on Tuesday night, but that's okay. We will count the vote, and we will get everybody involved to the extent that we can. And it'll be an interesting time for sure.
Well, I want to just thank you. I want to thank you both again for taking the time out of your busy schedules, especially 5 days before this unprecedented election, to join us for this important discussion. I know that voters who are tuning in greatly appreciate your expertise on this vitally important issue. And Pam, thank you for reminding folks that it will be normal for us not to have election results on Tuesday night, because I think managing expectations around what's in store for us next week is so important, so that discord isn't sowed in our country by malign or nefarious actors. You know, for those of you who took the time to tune in live or watching this later on, I want to thank you for your commitment to just staying informed about this election. If you haven't voted already, please make that plan to go vote. It's so important. If you've received your mail-in ballot, but you haven't put it in the mail yet, you know, please consider dropping it off at your town's local ballot drop box or at your clerk's office. This will ensure that your vote is counted as we are just 5 days away from Election Day. You can visit trahan.house.gov and click on our voter resource page to find out more information on this. And if you aren't planning to vote by mail, tomorrow, October 30th, is the last day that you'll be able to vote early in person. If you can't make it tomorrow, you'll have to wait until Election Day and go to your specific voting location. So for more important dates and additional voting information, please visit the voter resource guide on my website at, again, trahan.house.gov, or by clicking on the link that I posted in the comments. And since I'm a mom, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't close by encouraging you to continue taking care of yourself and being respectful of others. We're seeing surges in COVID-19 in communities across Massachusetts, and each of us still have an important role to play in slowing the spread of this virus. So please continue to avoid large groups and parties, maintain a safe social distance when you're out in public, and keep wearing that mask, and of course, washing your hands. We are not out of the woods, and as we enter the winter, it is so important that we do everything we can to slow the spread of this virus. So thank you all again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and vote. All right, everyone, take care.